What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And joining me, Chris Fedor, Jimmy Watkins. You know him, you love him. Coming to you guys after the Knicks-Pacers Game 5, where the Knicks extend the series, pushing it to Game 6. That will take place in Indiana over the weekend. Guys, this game was interesting from start to finish. Obviously, the Knicks had a stranglehold over the Pacers in a series where it felt like Indiana has had an upper hand for a majority of these games. Right now, the series is 3-2 heading back to Indiana, and I think it's a interesting dynamic that we're seeing here as we've gotten to a league where it's, okay, defense might win championships, but offense has got to be there on the other side for that to be the case, right? And obviously the Pacers offense simply wasn't there. Did you guys see signs of what happened in maybe a Game 4 for the Cavs against Indiana in the Eastern Conference semifinals?
I think we've stepped into a world in the NBA where so much of success and failure in the playoffs is predicated on matchups and how your team matches up against the other team and what kinds of stylistic advantages you can create. And I thought one of the things that the Knicks did really, really well that allowed them to kind of exploit some of the things that Indiana had done throughout the course of a majority of this series was they took Jalen Brunson off the ball and they kept him from being targeted by the Pacers on the defensive end of the floor, especially at the beginning of the game. And it's like all that ball pressure that can be bothersome to teams, including the Cavs. We saw how bothersome it was. Finding another primary ball handler to kind of initiate, play him off the ball, take advantage of Aaron Nesmith. If you're going to make your guy, your primary guy, go up against Aaron Nesmith in a one-on-one situation with him pressing, with him fighting through screens and stuff like that, it's a little bit different. But if you're going to make him have to chase around screens off the ball while he's dealing with a gimpy ankle, you might find a little bit more offensive flow and a little bit more offensive success. So I think getting Jalen Brunson comfortable early by playing him off the ball and keeping him from being worn down and keeping that relentless on-ball pressure of the Pacers off of him just enough, I think that's important. I think one of the things that we see throughout the course of these playoffs is multiple shot creators is really, really important to the success of a high-level offense. Minnesota didn't have it. Minnesota's got one. It's Anthony Edwards. And you saw the kinds of problems that they had consistently on the offensive end throughout the series against a premier defensive team. I think Indy has an ability to be a really good defensive team. But I thought they did some smart things the Knicks did to try and keep it so that Indiana's pressure didn't bother them as much as maybe it has in previous games.
As Chris was saying, I was thinking back to Kobe Altman end of season press conference volunteering a coaching adjustment, saying, hey, maybe we get Evan Mobley bringing the ball up a little bit more to alleviate ball pressure. You're gonna take Andrew Nembhard or Aaron Nesmith off of a guard and have them hound Evan Mobley up the court, or are you gonna have Miles Turner, Pascal Siakam try to guard him for 90 feet? Is that a worthy use of their energy? Do you get your matchups? Do you get your matchups mixed up by doing that? That's kind of, I thought at the time it was interesting. I don't think we've talked about that quite yet. We obviously have talked about getting the ball and having chance, but maybe a little nudge at Kenny. It's again, Kenny's doing this. Kenny was doing this for the first time, essentially. Right. He had never coached in the playoffs with expectations before. He had never, the one playoff series he had been in before, of course, he had been around Steve Kerr and Tyronn Lue, and the assistants are heavily involved in making game-to-game adjustments, right? But to be the one in-game pulling the strings yourself is a different experience. Every little thing can matter. That's one of the things that Rick Carlisle is so good at, is just throwing you a knuckleball on this possession or that one. In-game, from quarter to quarter, you might see something a little different. So that's one small thing. I would also just like not to sound like inside the NBA, like I played in the 90s, but I just think one of the things that stood out to me, like the Knicks, like the Cavs in their game 5, came out hair on fire. You expect that's you better come out here on fire when your season's on the line. That's the bare minimum. But they kept it up.
Yeah.
They kept it up. And it helped that Indiana didn't really have it. And to our larger point about multiple shot creators, boy, when Tyrese Halliburton doesn't have the magic, the Pacers are a very different basketball team, and he didn't have it tonight. And it was a trickle-down effect for their entire roster. But the Pacers did the thing. Like early in the fourth quarter, Carlisle left his bench in there a little bit longer, and Benedict Mathurin started going nuts and making Benedict Mathurin. Who knew? Who knew what kind of playoff guy? He's a fun change of pace. He's like a pure sixth man where it's like he's either going to flip this game on its head because he's going to make 4 shots you've never seen him make before, or Rick Carlisle's going to yank him out for taking a terrible shot that you don't understand. And even like down to I know Cavs fans freaking hate Benedict Mathurin for his chippiness, but like he was kind of at it again tonight with Brunson. Like that's the kind of guy you want to go to war with if he's on your side. That's just an aside. But the Pacers, it was starting. And they got to the point where Reggie Miller was like, hey, this is even closer than game 1 was when the Pacers made that comeback. And the Knicks were like, no. There's just like, those are the things you don't notice, right? The way that when games end the way they're supposed to, and obviously the Knicks had an ugly choke job in this series as well. We need to give credit to the Pacers because they're doing this. They're doing things that teams have never done, and they're doing it 3 times in the same postseason, right? But tonight, I thought you saw resolve from the Knicks. I thought you saw mental toughness. I thought you saw them stem tides that could have legitimately snowballed the other direction. And again, I know I sound like Kenny Smith right now, but that's real. That's a real thing. That's a real thing that the Cavs too often have not been able to do. And the Knicks found it. I mean, you can lean on your crowd. You can say lean on your crowd. Cavs went 0-3 at home. They had their crowd with them. The crowd turned on them at the end because they were so frustrated by how poorly they handled Indiana's pressure and the inherent pressure that comes with having runs go against you. The Knicks handled that better.
To Chris's point earlier about Aaron Nesmith, I think going against Aaron Nesmith and understanding how Tom Thibodeau attacked him in this game, it also was very much apparent to the amount that he was on the bench. Right? Rick Carlisle didn't feel like he was comfortable enough to go to Aaron Nesmith in that matchup. He played just 16 minutes tonight. To Jimmy's point, when we talk about the Cavs and we talk about how the ball creators are so important and there's these teams that don't roll over, and in some senses they do, like the Minnesota Timberwolves did in their game 5. I think Chris Finch said it in his end of season press conference, right? Talking about the need for ball handling and passing in today's NBA with all the switching you see defensively. With that in mind, an NBA head coach saying that, do you guys think that the Cavs have enough of that, or would losing Darius Garland potentially change that narrative for the Cavs? And was that apparent with how the Cavs were operating when Darius wasn't on the floor, when he was injured throughout the Eastern Conference semifinals and the first round, which, as we mentioned, really wasn't a playoff series for the Cavs?
I mean, the games that the Cavs did not have Darius against Indy, I feel like they missed his shot creation and his playmaking, and you could feel that. So much of the burden fell on Donovan. Now, some of that coincided with Evan Mobley also missing a game, so you didn't have that kind of offensive hub that you could go through. But I do think, part of what made the Cavs so unique and so special during the regular season on the offensive end is that it just wasn't a one-man show. It wasn't a heliocentric offense. A lot of guys felt like they were involved. A lot of guys were touching the ball on a given possession. The ball was moving around, and I don't think they passed it nearly as much as a team like Indiana, but there was purpose behind what they were doing. And there were random cuts that kind of confused a defense. And so much of what the Cavs were during the regular season, we just didn't see in the series against Indiana. Now, give credit to the Pacers for disrupting their rhythm, taking them out of what they wanted to do. And as I've labeled it many different times on this podcast, like, shatter their identity. But I do think, this Cavs team is built on skill. And it's not built on toughness. It's not built on physicality. I don't think it's built on length and athleticism. Every different team in the NBA has a kind of style of player that they're looking for, that they want to build around. Every team in the NBA has a specific identity. And I think if we're talking about the Cavs' identity, can we be the most skilled team out there? And for a lot of the season, they were very, very skilled. They had a bunch of different dudes that could pass, dribble, and shoot. They had a bunch of different dudes who could get involved in the offense some kind of way. They have connectors. They have triggers. They have offensive hubs. They have 3-level scorers. They have pick and roll threats and Ty Jerome, Darius Garland, and Donovan Mitchell. Those 3 guys are elite pick and roll players. I don't know that all of them are equipped to be ISO-centric players that attack switches beautifully. But I think they have enough, like when Darius is healthy, when Ty Jerome is playing at a 6-man level, and if he comes back, and when Donovan Mitchell is Donovan Mitchell, and Evan Mobley with his evolution on the offensive end of the floor, I do think they have enough playmaking when this team is fully healthy and operating to the level that they're used to operating at.
That's true. That's a viable way to build a team. But I'm just kind of, I was just thinking while you're talking, I'm surveying the conference finalists here and wondering, what do they have that the Cavs don't have? The skill, skill, if deployed correctly, we saw like the Golden State Warriors, they were a great defensive team, but skill, passing, cutting, shooting. That's how they won a champion. That's how they won. That's how they won 4 championships with Steph and Clay and Draymond. I think the one thing the Cavs seem to be lacking, and part of this is personnel, part of this is how they deploy their guys, is positional size. And look around the conference finals. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, it's a big point guard. Jalen Williams, big. Chet Holmgren, a skinny rim protector. He's got Isaiah Hartenstein standing next to him. Mm-hmm. Alex Caruso, not the tallest guy. Dude's guarding Jokic. Okay. Right. He plays bigger than Randle. Yeah. And Julius Randle. And Anthony Edwards. But like that guy's Alex Caruso is amazing. The Pacers. Andrew Nembhard, yes, he plays off guard, but he's 6'4" in a guarding point guards, right? Mm-hmm. I define your position as who you guard. Mm-hmm. Aaron Nesmith, bigger, bulkier guy. Yeah. The Pacers aren't big up front, but they make that work with their skill. I mean, Miles Turner's big. He doesn't always play big, but he's big. Pascal Siakam is big enough. Obi Toppin's big enough, and when they're not big enough, they're fast enough to make other big people hurt. So I guess it's a combination of this. They don't have the positional size to hang with some of these teams, and they're not leveraging their skill enough in a way that makes up for that lack of positional size. So in theory, like some of these, if we're talking about archetypes of guys that we're looking, like can you just find a 6'4" Darius Garland facsimile, or a 215 to 20 pound Darius Garland facsimile, or how even this we want to have this conversation again. DeAndre Hunter at the 3. DeAndre Hunter at the 3. You'll look a little bigger. Yeah. Obviously, Jared Allen and Evan Mobley are both large. They could play larger, but I'm just thinking like Minnesota's got positional size. The Thunder have positional size. If you don't have positional size, your skill has to overwhelm. And the Pacers kind of thread that. They do both a little bit. They're on defense in the backcourt. They have positional size. On offense, they overwhelm you with skill. That's a thought I had. The other thing I was when we were talking about shooting, because yes, the Cavs in theory are supposed to overwhelm you with skill. That's what's supposed to happen. That makes Ty Jerome and Sam Merrill two very important free agents, doesn't it?
Mm.
Because if you lose both of those guys and you try to fill them in, like, you're probably not going to do. I mean, maybe you can do 75-80% of Sam Merrill with a minimum signing. Find a shooter, find a ring chaser, something like that.
Yeah,
Ty Jerome's a tough one. You're not going to find a guy who's begging the 6th man of the year ballot on the minimum. I know it was awful in the playoffs, but you're just not going to replicate what he was doing in the regular season with a minimum signing. And the other thing is, you lose both those guys, all of a sudden, your shooting depth takes a big hit here, right? Like, Darius and Donovan are both really good, but they're both on the ball all the time. Like, now you're overlapping the Chris Finch point is you gotta have both. And if two of your best shooters are also two of your best ball handlers, and then your other, like, Ty Jerome's basically the only other guy that they consistently trusted to dribble the ball up the court this year. If he's gone, suddenly you're looking a little thin in that department. And DeAndre Hunter, there's more to be discovered there. You could argue he should have been doing more on the ball anyways. Obviously, he got hurt against Indiana. I'm just talking bigger picture here, and I do believe that will happen as he gets a full off season with the Cavs here. But I was just looking, because it does, like, yes, the Cavs were the best 3-point shooting team in the league, but Donovan and Darius, I think it's the kind of threes you get. Donovan and Darius can get so many pull-up threes, and they make up a good chunk of your 3-point shooting volume. Your floor spacers need to be knockdown guys too, and they have two of those guys are at risk of leaving this offseason.
I also think these playoffs guys, they have reaffirmed the importance of depth. I think we went through an era where it was a star-driven league, and do you have a big three? There was the big three era, and how good were your three against the other three? And look, this is still a stars league, and you need your best, highest paid players to perform like those guys. And Evan Mobley didn't, not consistently enough against Indiana, and Darius Garland didn't, and obviously there are reasons for that. But there's also a part of success nowadays where it's, how good are you 7 through 10? How much do 7 through 10 hurt you if you have to go to those guys? How playable are 7 through 10 in a playoff environment? And if you look at Indiana, they're just like bringing dudes off the bench. And it doesn't have to be every single game, right? That's not what a role player is. A role player is not going to be consistent. His shots won't be consistent. His minutes won't be consistent. His scoring won't be consistent. His impact won't be consistent. But can you get something from him one night? Then can you get something from guy number 8 the next night? Guy number 9 the next night? You can't get into a situation where you're consistently saying, we're yanking that guy out of the rotation. We're yanking that guy. That guy's unplayable. That guy's unplayable. That guy's unplayable. And some of these teams are starting to get in these situations where they're looking toward the bench and they're saying to themselves, nope, can't go to him. Nope, can't go to him. I mean, Miami ran out of guys completely. Ran out of guys that Eric Spoelstra could trust. Tried a bunch of different ones. Nope. Sorry, Duncan Robinson, can't play. Getting cooked. Sorry, Alec Burks. You started the first game of the series. Now you can't play the rest of the way. And over the course of a 7-game series, you're going to feel that. Even New York, for how many guys they have that play high minutes, they've got other guys coming off the bench that are making an impact. Oklahoma City, one night it might be Aaron Wiggins. Another night it might be Kenrich Williams. Another night it might be the other Jalen Williams. So having as many guys between the 7 to 11 range, I guess, that you feel like can be playable in a playoff environment in today's NBA with some salary cap restrictions, with some team building complications, that might end up being a pretty interesting separator.
The Thunder are the best example of this because they just have so many different dudes that they can try. So, okay, that doesn't work. They have like legitimately 12 or 13 playable guys that they can try, and they can, on most nights, scrunch together an 8 or 9 man rotation of those guys. And what you're looking for, as Chris said, either stick out for a good reason or don't stick out for a bad one. Like, sometimes Ben Shepherd's just out there for the Pacers, and he's trying on defense, and he's got his little hipster mustache, and that's it. That's all we oh, that's a nice mustache, Ben. Nice mustache. You didn't kill us out there. If you make the occasional open three, that's great. Just soak up some minutes. I mean, Carlisle, that's what Carlisle did this all the time. We talked about during the series. He's just trying to steal a breath here and there for the guys who are going to decide the game. So what we need you to do, Ben Shepherd, Jarris Walker, who it won't matter, they lost by 17, hit 2 threes tonight. That's a massive win.
Yep.
That's a massive win. He was like, I think he was +5. I just looked. And he had 6 points. Great. We'll take it. You move your feet pretty well for a guy your size on defense. Just don't stick out. I think the Cavs thought they were one of these teams. Mm-hmm. I think Kenny went in one of the reasons Kenny was preaching depth in the playoffs because, hey, we talked about it, right? There's going to be a moment for Isaac Okoro if this run goes as long as it may not be immediately, but there's going to be a moment for him. It's just the Cavs, in theory, were a team who could, shift shapes as well as anyone. It's just when it was time to put that theory to the test, there weren't as many guys ready to fill in as they thought. So I remember asking, and Carlisle gave me a bad answer because I think he knew what I was getting at. I asked him before one of the games, what's the difference between regular season depth and playoff depth?
Yeah.
And that's really what we're talking about here. There's on some of these guys, like, again, not to pick on Buddy, but Isaac Okoro, it's a 3-year evaluation that tells me that people aren't going to guard you and you're not going to make them pay enough when they don't guard you. So I don't really know what to do here, except for put you in the trade machine and see if I can cut a corner on the second apron with that one. Ty Jerome, I'm willing to give a second chance. Like I said before, it was really, 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 really ugly against the Pacers. It was a really bad circumstance for him, being thrust into a role he's not suited for. And they had the right kind of guys to defend him that could knock him off his game. And boy, did they. Boy, did they. But his skill set is something that could help them in other series when he's not one of the two, and in some cases, the most important offensive player on the court. Maybe. I don't know. Sam Merrill, open to it. Not in a high minutes left, but Sam Merrill's like a guy. He could be like, you're a Kenrich Williams, obviously 2 very different players, but Mark Dagnall will just all of a sudden be like, hey, we need some Kenrich Williams in our life right now. Right. We need someone who's going to play 120 miles per hour and not be afraid to shoot when the ball comes to him. And Kenrich Williams is like, yeah, I haven't played since 10 days ago, but I'm ready. And I think Sam Merrill can be one of those guys that you pluck in and say, hey, we just really need your shooting right now. We really need it. You were great all year. Can you give us what you gave us during the year? I think Sam Merrill can be a button you press. I don't know if he's your 7th man or your spot starter, as he was at points of this postseason. Again, injuries, circumstances, but he's one of those guys. The Cavs, that's one of the biggest evaluations that needs to factor into everything they're doing is, the 16-game thing that Kobe, that's what it all revolves around now. I don't really care how much you have helped me over 82 games if you can't help me over 16 right now.
So I think the question then turns for both of you. The Cavs have struggled, even though they have used that depth to such great lengths throughout the regular season, in translating that to the postseason. Do you think that's more of a Kenny Atkinson didn't use them enough to give them the run to have those opportunities? Or do you think that the Cavs might need to get different depth pieces that have postseason pedigree? Or do you think they just needed this experience to get to that? So there's 3 different kind of options for you guys there. We've said this a lot. It feels like there's answers on this roster. They just haven't answered the question that's placed in front of them every time they've gotten placed in a precarious situation. And to me, potentially the answer is, well, if you put Max Strus as the seventh man, you have Ty Jerome still as your sixth man, and then you have Sam Merrill coming off the bench with Dean Wade. That might extend the bench a little bit further, even though it's an internal move rather than an external change of the roster. What do you guys think?
Well, they just don't have a lot of room to make too many changes when it comes to bringing guys in from outside the organization that can make a tangible impact. Their best path this offseason, if they don't make trades, and look, like, I don't want this to sound as if the Cavs are in a dire situation, because I think if we're being honest about it, over the next 3 to 5 years, you can make an argument that the Cavs have the best setup of any team in the Eastern Conference. You can make that argument. They've got 3 All-Stars. They've got 2 All-NBA players. They've got the Defensive Player of the Year. Every core member is 28 or under, and also under contracts. So despite some salary cap limitations, despite the lack of draft capital, this is still a really good team in a really good situation. But I think there's another truth that's involved here, and it's one that Kobe Altman has talked about. They've got to figure out the 16-game thing. When you're at the point that the Cavs are at, with their salary cap situation, with so many high-priced guys, with the luxury tax, with the second apron, it's about how do you win a championship. So do you have the kinds of guys that can help you win a championship? And if they don't make trades, if they choose to quote-unquote run it back, keep the core 4 together, they're really limited in the kinds of things that they can do to improve this basketball team. They are. So I don't know that I look at it and say, well, you start changing a lot of those pieces, because the restrictions for them come when it comes to external moves. Internally, they can bring back Ty Jerome. Internally, they can bring back Sam Merrill. And I think if you guys remember, about 10 years ago, the Cavs overpaid for Tristan Thompson, and they overpaid for J.R. Smith when they were free agents, because they had to, because they had no other choice. Because if they let those guys walk, they weren't going to be able to replace them. These Cavs are in a similar situation. If they let Ty Jerome walk, not going to be able to replace him. Greg Porter Jr. is not ready for those minutes. Like Jimmy said, a guy on a veteran's minimum is not giving you what Ty Jerome gave you this past year. And if you let Sam Merrill walk, or if his price range kind of gets out of where the Cavs are comfortable, you're talking about bringing in a veteran minimum type guy to be what Sam was for this team, be what Kenny Atkinson wants from that particular role. So I think they're limited in how can they improve some of these pieces on the bench. I don't know that Kenny shortened his leash too much in the series against Indiana. I don't fall in that category. So I don't know what the answer is for this team in this situation that they're in when it comes to improving those particular pieces, which is why I keep going back to an idea of how can you, if it makes sense, and if you feel like it makes you a better basketball team that gets you closer to a championship, what is your pathway to reconfigure the roster? What is your pathway to reimagine this team in some sort of way? What is your pathway to reset slightly the salary cap sheet? And I know people don't want to talk about that because it gets really, really nerdy and you talk about numbers and math and stuff like that. But the Cavs know at some point they are going to have to make a decision on the 4. They're going to have to, because it's just like the reality of the life that they're living in. And Kobe Altman said, I like this place. I want to be in this space. I want to continue to be in this space. But it also requires a lot of maneuvering some creativity. And there's part of me that thinks that their best path forward to do the things that they probably have to do to close the gap on some of these other teams is a more significant move as opposed to just something small around the margins, because I don't know that small around the margins exists for this team.
Yeah, it's basically you have to do something pretty drastic or you're not going to do much of anything at all. And that's a tough decision to make because it's two drastically different paths you're going in. And Kobe Altman, I get what he's saying. You know, he likes being the pressure cooker. But like, do you like having to make this decision to either break up a 64-win team in a way that you might not, that you're not sure whether that will work, or stick with a team that you don't know can perform well in the playoffs? That sounds tough. That sounds like a tough one to me. Because here's the thing. I think this has been I think this was a Zach Lowe topic today and a Bill Simmons topic this week as well. Like the best Eastern Conference setups for the next 3 to 5 years has been floating. So I've been thinking about it a lot, but I'm just a podcast head. And I think Cavs have a legitimate argument to that throne. But to me, that should up the urgency to cash in on this window with a championship. Because if you can probably, if the Cavs can have the same result next year, and you can make the same argument again, well, the next 3 to 5 years, they still have 3 All-Stars in their 20s. At the end of that, you can say that as many times as you want. You don't win a championship, no one will care. No one will care. So you have to maximize while you have this great setup, which you do. I'm not poo-pooing that. You have a great shell of a team. You have a malleable 23-year-old, soon to be 24-year-old Evan Mobley, who's very exciting, and you want to get the most out of him now and later. And I wonder, I think we've talked about this before. I'm thinking about what if the Cavs, okay, so the Cavs, let's say they do nothing. They mostly run it back, a defensible decision, bank on Darius being healthier next year in the playoffs, bank on another improvement from Evan Mobley, bank on experience being your best teacher when it comes to mental toughness. And whoops, you get upended in the second round again. We're talking about mental toughness again. At that point, the book's out on your guys, and I think it's harder to trade them. Frankly, the two you want to trade at least, Jared Allen and Darius Garland. Right now, you can. I mean, I feel like every year that you let go by without an impressive playoff performance by Darius Garland, you're letting some other team talk themselves out of giving you good stuff or better stuff for Darius Garland. Every year that Jared Allen has these weird games where he floats through playoffs, through playoff performances and gives you a 6'9" dude grabbing like 6 rebounds combined in the last 2 games, that's another year that a team goes, well, what is this guy really? Like, is he really worth giving up real assets for? So that's another thing that has to be factored in here. On the end of bench guys or trying to around the margins jigger the rotation kind of stuff, that's not a bad pitch to bring chasing veterans. What Chris, like, we have the best 3-year window here, and guess what? Particularly next year, because almost no one signs a minimum deal for longer than 1 year. Except for remember when the Suns signed Yuta Watanabe,
Yes,
and all those guys for 1+1 minimum deals, and it was like, oh, the Suns are geniuses. The Suns are geniuses. How did they do this? I've never seen someone manage their minimums this well before. Like, a lot of good that did them, but you can pitch them on that. The East is going to suck next year. We've been saying you never know when you're going to win 60 games again. I don't know, man. The East, right. You just did it this year. The East is going to be a lot worse next year. We're talking about teams like Atlanta is licking its chops. Once Jalen Johnson gets healthy, we could be a top 3 seed. Why not? Or the Orlando Magic, if Jalen Suggs can stay healthy, if they can get a freaking point guard that works, get some more shooting in there, the Orlando Magic are going to be toward the top of this conference. The crown is vacant, essentially. I don't think even if the Pacers, regardless of who wins this series, I don't think anyone's going into the East next year if you're near the top or have aspirations and thinking, oh man, how are we going to beat the Pacers or the Knicks? This is not an Oklahoma, and that's no disrespect to either of those teams. They're both very talented. They both deserve to get where they've gotten, and they both will be heard from again this time next year. But this is not an Oklahoma City Thunder situation where they've already just run through the conference and they're only going to get better, right? Yeah. Those teams are mostly what they are. They can make moves on the margins, or if the Knicks lose the series, they could try to make a big move and trade off one of their bigger contracts. That's possible. But the East is going to be open next year. Veterans come here. I don't know who's going to heed that pitch. I don't know, but that's something to think about.
Is it possible that they could get Dante Exum on the minimum? Sure, I think that's possible. Is it possible that they could get Steven Adams on the minimum or something along those lines? Yeah, I mean, I think that's possible. But
Dante Exum contributed to a finals run last year, by the way. Just want that to be known. That's not a name to sneeze at.
But the only thing that I'm saying is they're not the only good team in the NBA that's going to be pitching these kinds of things, right? They're not the only team in the NBA that a player is going to look around and say, hey, I got a chance for a playoff appearance there, or I've got a chance for a ring there. There are other teams that are also going to be appealing to some of these guys that are among the minimum type players.
And they will have probably bigger roles. Those other teams will have bigger roles to offer them. We're talking bit roles for the Cavs for the most part.
I don't know if Steven Adams wants a big role. I think Steven Adams is good doing what he does, coming in and mucking stuff up and grabbing rebounds and being a defensive menace, right? And I think that's a guy that I've seen matriculating throughout social media that I kept my eyes and ears on, and is someone that is arguably one of the strongest players in the NBA, period. And I think that would be interesting. And I'm still of the belief, especially after reading some of the stuff that Chris Finch was saying, seeing some of how the league has kind of looked at this playoff run. And I think the Cavs are better suited to keep Darius Garland and walk away from Jared Allen, even though you would get less back for Jared Allen. That's understandable. I think that is something that the Cavs could look to do, because moving Evan Mobley to the 5 has been a thought that they've had for years now, and have been something that they've been working towards in the background, obviously also in the forefront, with splitting the minutes between Evan and J.A., which is something that we've seen throughout the league. So that's where I stand on this. I'm not sure how the Cavs, even if they do get a defensive guard, even if they do get a bigger guard, are they going to get somebody back for Darius Garland that can create offense, pass the ball handle, get up the floor? And I think there's little things behind the scenes that I'm writing about for my article tomorrow on Kenny Atkinson's summer regimen and being in Cleveland for the first year. And I think one of the biggest ones is getting past the press break for defenses and finding out what works for the Cavs to get around that. Or utilize a screen setter that is capable of getting up and down the floor to match Darius Garland, so he has other options rather than just being left in the backcourt by himself to deal with whoever it may be. So I think that's where my head is at when it comes to the bigger moves, if possible. But I do think that Kenny Atkinson being in Cleveland for the entire summer rather than traveling around the world trying to get his feet wet with the players, and also coaching Team France during that time, will be helpful for this team in making a bigger jump, even if it is minor, even if it is without major moves around the margins.
Does anyone else besides me wonder about Evan's readiness to be a full-time 5 at this point?
It's fine to question it. But when we talk about readiness, when we talk about being a full-time 5, what are your concerns?
My concerns are the minutes that he would spend going up against starter quality centers that are bigger, stronger, and more physical than him. He's going to spend a majority of his time against Zubats. He's going to spend a majority of his time against Mitchell Robinson. He's going to spend a majority of his time against Miles Turner, who, again, he's not the biggest dude out there, but he's bigger. He's more mature. He's more put together than somebody like Evan. He's going to spend the majority of his time dealing with Domas Sabonis. I just don't know. What if, and I don't know the answer to this, what if everybody believes that Evan's future is at the 5, but if this thing goes in the way that it seems to be headed, and more teams are okay with the 2 big setup, what if his future is actually at the 4? What if his best position ends up being the 4 in today's era?
That's a fair question. I would want to see, I mean, this year was a great jump. I'd want to see even more 3-point volume from him if that's going to be the case. What I'll say to him I think you can Anthony Davis this situation with Evan, where it was like Anthony Davis was always like, get me a center. Anthony Davis certainly thought his best position was at the 4 because he didn't like banging bodies down there. But when it was time to win games,
like some of these guys,
I don't blame him.
Some of these guys aren't equipped to bang bodies as a center, as a full-time center.
I roll my eyes a little. Obviously, Anthony Davis is injury prone, so that's a concern. But I roll my eyes when Anthony Davis, who is, let's say, a little burlier than Evan Mobley, and is a full-fledged superstar, I kind of roll my eyes a little bit at that. And also when the Lakers at the time, when your team doesn't have as much wiggle room to spare regular season wins because you're in the Western Conference and the rest of your team isn't that good. We don't need to go too far down that rabbit hole. But I think the Cavs, because they have proven they are so good at the regular season, and because the Eastern Conference is down right now, they can afford to, during the regular season, let's say they get rid of Jared Allen, and they sign a vet, or they get rid of Jared Allen, and part of the Jared Allen return is just average starting center, or you try to moneyball that position and get a vet minimum guy who you spot start, and Evan only plays the 5, pretty much does what he's been doing, right? Where he plays the 5 as with the second unit, and he closes games at the 5 sometimes, but it's not his full-time position. I don't think that would hurt the Cavs very much. I think it would save a decent amount of wear and tear on Evan. And when it was time for the Lakers to win playoff games, Anthony Davis was playing the frickin' 5 because that was how it needed to be for them to space the floor the best. Evan Mobley's also, besides 1 year in the bubble, which I think we can all write off as not being real, at least in this case, Anthony Davis has just not, in recent years he's been a little better, but he's just not been a consistent jump shooter. Evan Mobley is off to a good start in that regard. We need to build on it. So I think that's one way you can work around that. What your point is an interesting one, Chris. If we are going more towards 2 bigs, and every time a new team wins a championship, something about them gets parroted. OKC is the overwhelming favorite to win the championship right now. They've paired Chet Holmgren, who is. It's an extreme, his frail frame is an extreme version of Evan Mobley's, but there's a comparison there where the Thunder would not want Chet Holmgren to be a full-time 5 for similar reasons that the Cavs don't want Evan Mobley to be a full-time 5. So they went out and got Isaiah Hartenstein. The Cavs don't have that luxury. Jared Allen is their Isaiah Hartenstein, and they can't really do much better than him. I don't think. I shouldn't say that with certainty, but some teams are going to go, and maybe that's the takeaway. I don't know that should be the takeaway. I think the takeaway from the Thunder is just get as many players as you can that aren't a liability on either end. They're just obviously draft well, and it's have a Shea. Here's my advice to you: get an MVP. That will help you win a championship. But also have as many guys who can defend and shoot as possible, 2-way guys. That's the real lesson from the Thunder. And by the way, I think that's the real lesson from most champions. But sometimes teams do other stuff, and the Cavs can capitalize on teams taking away other things from this. Like our friend Nico Harrison, big 2 bigs guy, and You could make Chet Holmgren, and a big part of the reason the Thunder's defense is so good, by the way, is because they have both of those guys and one of them on the floor at all times too. That's not poo-poo that. So that's an interesting point.
I also think there's something to the level of responsibility and what the inherent responsibilities are of a 5-man. And I totally understand that when it comes to today's NBA, it's positionless and you talk about the 4 and the 5, but there are different responsibilities that you have depending on how you want to function, right? And the Cavs are still, they're not only pick and roll, but a large part of what they do is still pick and roll stuff. Now, there's things that happen within the offensive set, but Kenny Atkinson loves the pick and roll, and Donovan Mitchell loves the pick and roll, and so does Darius, and so does Ty Jerome. It's different when you make Evan Mobley the primary screen setter than Jared Allen. We can all agree on that, yeah? Jared Allen, over the last however many years, is consistently in the top 8 of screen assists, in the same conversation as Rudy Gobert, Isaiah Hartenstein, Domas Sabonis, Jakob Poeltl, Jalen Duren. Part of what helped the Cavs be the offense that they were was the role that Jared Allen played as a screen setter, as a roller, as a vertical spacer, as a lob threat. And yes, you can find somebody to do those things, but can you find them to do them at the same level with the same consistency as Jared has? And then if you flip it on defense, Evan's a great defender. He's going to transcend everything. He's Defensive Player of the Year for a reason. But if he's the full-time center, his responsibilities are going to be different. They're going to be different than what they are right now. He takes advantage of being a weak side help defender. He takes advantage at times of being a roamer. He takes advantage of his versatility, his switchability, and stuff like that. If he's playing next to somebody other than Jared Allen for a majority of the game or for a large chunk of the game, now all of a sudden, some of the things that you like most about Evan on the defensive end of the floor, can he do those things? Are you going to ask him to do those things? Are you going to be comfortable enough to allow him to do those things? All I'm saying is I don't think it's as seamless as people are making it sound when it comes to the potential of moving on from Jared Allen and the domino effect of what that means to the Cavs and what that means to Evan Mobley at both ends of the floor.
I think that's fair. And I think you make some good points, especially about the defensive end, because I think Evan Mobley is probably better as a safety rather than as an initial deterrent. Obviously, his presence itself deters, but like Jared Allen's body and physical attributes allow him to withstand. But I think, as I said, Evan Mobley as a help side defender, somebody like Isaiah Hartenstein or like Chet Holmgren, as we saw in their latest game against the Minnesota Timberwolves when they trapped Julius Randle down low and Isaiah Hartenstein came in to clean up the mess. I think that's a good iteration. And to Jimmy's point, even though Chet and Isaiah Hartenstein might be the poster boys right now, teams began, and we talked about this on a podcast earlier this year, teams began putting together these dynamic duos, these front court twin towers, because of the success that Evan Mobley and Jared Allen have. So I'm not saying partially.
I mean, the Lakers won a championship playing two bigs together, so
right.
That was a big shift change. But yes, I mean the Cavs, part of it was that those two guys together.
There were references this season to coaches saying that they looked at the Jared Allen and Evan Mobley pairing and said, "Hey, that would look great for us too. Let's make it that way." Okay, and so I'm not saying that Jared Allen would be easy to come off of in any means. I just think with what the Cavs need offensively, what the Cavs would also still have defensively, and then you throw in maybe DeAndre Hunter at the 4 alongside Evan Mobley, who still has the strength to guard some of these bigger centers, not necessarily say he's going up against Giannis, but like a Victor Wembanyama, he's been capable of guarding. And these guys that still have the size that might overpower some power forwards. DeAndre is a guy that can help mitigate those. And if the Cavs keep Dean Wade on the roster, he is one of those guys as well. I do want to make this point before we keep going because we're already 50 minutes in and I wanted to get this stat off. Shout out to Jackson Flickinger for sending this over to me earlier today. The Cavs were in the 100th percentile in net rating and offensive rating, and in the 99th percentile in defensive rating when they had Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, DeAndre Hunter, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen on the floor together. And they only played around 80 possessions together combined in the regular season and the playoffs. I think that's too little. I think that needs to change, and it likely will change, especially if the starting lineup changes next year. And we talked a little bit about that earlier in the podcast about how important the depth of this lineup is, the depth of this roster is, and how if the Cavs decide to run it back, how slight changes internally to the lineups, to the rotations, again, kind of like how Kenny Atkinson did it in his first season, pairing up Donovan Mitchell with Evan Mobley instead of Donovan with Jared, as J.D. Bickerstaff had been doing it over previous years. Those types of things could make an impact on how the Cavs get to another level that they've been trying to.
A front court of Evan Mobley at the 5 and DeAndre Hunter at the 4 is just asking for problems when it comes to rebounding and finishing defensive possessions. That's all.
There's so much here. I was going to do like I'll do a quick nerdy screen thing because Chris was talking about Jared Allen's screens and the difference between Jared Allen and Evan Mobley's screens. We've compared the Cavs a ton. I'm just offering an alternative solution. This is, again, a world where Jared Allen's gone, and we need to keep fostering pick and roll with Evan Mobley.
Mm-hmm.
What if the answer is not Evan Mobley setting screens?
Yeah, sure.
We've made all these Warriors comparisons to the Cavs. One of the best things about the Warriors offense is that Steph Curry is, on top of being the greatest shooter ever, he's one of the greatest and most willing little guy screen setters ever. And Draymond Green's essentially their point guard. And the Evan Mobley, Draymond Green comps are inexact because Evan Mobley's much bigger than Draymond Green, but the defensive versatility is there, and like he could be your kind of playmaker. Can we get Donovan and Darius? I frankly can't tell you how good either of them are at setting screens because they don't do it a ton. Can we get them? It's a question. It's an open question. That's just a straight thought I have. The other small thing the DeAndre Hunter net rating stuff, the DeAndre Hunter with the start, I'm sure. But you want to know who else's net rating is good with Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen? Everybody!
Isaac Okoro.
Everyone who plays with them has a good net rating. 80 possessions? I don't care. That's too small a sample size for me to care about. Sure, they should play it more. Eventually, they're going to have to because the second April is going to trim the roster, so that's the only 5 players left on the team by 2029 if they keep doing this. But I'm unmoved by that at this juncture. I'm also just thinking, like, functionally, if that's your lineup, how does this beautiful flowy cutting offense work? Who's your beautiful flowing cutting offense guy?
Yeah,
who is it? Could you get Darius to run around like Steph? That's a lot. That's a lot of wear and tear on him. Guys will get real handsy with him. Does he want to do that? I don't know. Does Donovan Mitchell want to do that? Can DeAndre Hunter do that?
So how about we do this?
We're just standing around and watching each other at that point. That's what I'm saying.
In a world where Jared Allen's not here, say the starting lineup then turns to Darius, Donovan, DeAndre, Dean Wade, and Evan Mobley.
I don't care. No, Dean Wade's not moving around either.
No.
I need the ball to move. I need balls and bodies to move. And I just don't see it like Max Strus is the guy. That's why Max Strus starts. That's why Kenny loves him so much. That's why Kenny loves Sam Merrill so much. That's why their offense was different because of these guys. So then you can't say I love everything that Kenny did with the offense, but let's stop doing that for our most important lineups. You can't have it both ways. And we're on this note. We keep coming to these kind of forks in the road where it's like, here's a potential change. Ooh, but if they change that, I don't know if this other thing's going to work. Like, okay, let's trade Darius Garland. But ooh, if we trade Darius Garland, who else is going to dribble the ball? We got like 2 guys on that team left who can dribble the ball. That's assuming the Brooklyn Nets don't just throw a penthouse at Ty Jerome and say, hey, come live here, Jared Allen.
Money Gardens, anytime you want. Yeah. Juliana's. Grimaldi's.
Jared Allen, you're not a playoff guy. We can't have you play. Ooh, but if we lose Jared Allen, the defense is, what happens to the defense? What happens to Evan Mobley as a rover? What happens to the pick and roll game? If that's the case, if your current roster is not good enough to win at a high level, and if you take pieces away from that roster and you're concerned about how it goes going, how good is the roster? This is what I'm coming back to. I think obviously it's a good roster. They won 64 games,
right? And
they led for half of a series that they lost in 5 games. There's a lot of small tweaks in there. I think that I think this just emphasizes my point about Kobe's in a tricky spot here, because I think it's a risk to assume internal development is the answer, and it's a risk to blow off a chunk of the core. There are no good answers here.
So I think we come back to the starting lineup thing, and the one that I threw out was more so adhering to the rebounding question that Chris was asking with DeAndre at the 4, right? And Jimmy, I think you make a great point. Max Strus's importance to the starting lineup is because of the movement, right? And Sam Merrill is obviously one of those movers as well.
He's also a much better rebounder than DeAndre Hunter.
Yeah,
he is. So what if DeAndre still comes off the bench? And I know Chris likes this answer more because of how good DeAndre was off the bench this year. And he's made this point a couple of different times on the podcast. But a starting lineup, again, this is me just putting out ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Darius, Donovan, Max, Dean, Evan Mobley.
I mean, again, I just don't think you want to get into a situation where you're trying to plug one hole, and as you plug that hole, like another one starts shooting water in your face. And then you plug that hole, and then up pops another one that shoots water on your leg. And then you plug that hole, all 3 of them all at the same time, and then all of a sudden another one shoots water like on your chest. You have to be careful about this sort of thing. And when I look at the Cavs and I try and assess this roster as honestly as possible, with as much emotion taken out of it and with a clear-eyed view of it, I just don't know how much you have to change their offense. Like, yes, I think there are small, subtle, intricate things that you can do differently. Get Evan Mobley more touches. Keep him more involved. Trust him more when you get into a playoff environment. Give him more than 13 shots. But if you're an elite pick and roll team, if you're an elite cutting team, if you're an elite movement team, the smallest change to that, it's very, very delicate. The smallest change to that could disrupt what you feel like is the best thing that you do. And I don't think it's entirely a coincidence that DeAndre Hunter specifically had the best year of his career coming off the bench as basically a full-time 6th man, away from ball-dominant guards. I think that's something that Atlanta learned. I think it's something that Cleveland believed as well. And I think keeping him away from 2 ball-dominant guards is probably going to be the best thing for DeAndre Hunter and the best thing for the Cavs. And it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be opportunities throughout the course of the season if he's here and if everything stays the same. It doesn't mean that there aren't going to be opportunities for him to play alongside the core 4 if the core 4 is here. And it doesn't mean there aren't going to be opportunities for him to finish games alongside the core 4 or whatever variation of that particular lineup that you do. But I think the majority of his minutes spent away ball-dominant guards gives him more freedom and allows him to be more like himself.
Probably not a coincidence that DeAndre Hunter played the second most games of his career after moving to the bench either. Something to think about. Keeping him on the bench can be a load management playoff move. Even if you want more of him with those guys in the playoffs, you can help make sure he gets to the playoffs, because he does have something of an injury track record, by keeping him on the bench and keep him happier, because he's a guy who likes to have the ball and, pull up from 17 and dribble a little bit. And it's not going to happen. He's going to be a shoot threes from the corner guy if he's on the court with Darius and Donovan. That's just it's a difficult spot.
Yep, and I think that's the conclusion we can firmly come to after today's podcast. We threw out a lot of things to see what would stick. Nothing really did.
Not a bad spot to be in, but it is an off-season with difficult decisions. Because, guys, this is the first time that they have lost a playoff series where there just aren't a bunch of qualifiers attached to it. 2 years ago, they just weren't ready. Too early in the development of the team. Evan Mobley's first real playoffs. Darius Garland, first real playoffs. Playing dudes who had no business being in an NBA rotation. A roster that wasn't ready, a team that wasn't ready. Then you talk about last year, they were banged up. They didn't have an opportunity to give their best shot to Boston, and they were screaming from the rooftops that coaching was a problem. So they could look at that loss in the Eastern Conference semifinals, and they could look at the fact that they got pushed to 7 games by the upstart Magic and say, well, part of it was we weren't healthy. The other part of it was we didn't believe in our coach. Our coach wasn't good enough as an X's and O's tactician. So if we change that, how different could this be? Right? This, they lose, and yeah, there were some injury things, but I don't think the majority of people inside this organization are looking at this semifinals loss to Indiana saying to themselves, it would have been different if Darius would have been 100%. It would have been different if DeAndre Hunter didn't bang his thumb. I think this is the first one that they've had where there's like an honest assessment of, yeah, we might have things that are wrong with the makeup of this roster. We might have non-correctable flaws. And I don't blame them for looking at it that way, even though it's still a pretty good situation, even though if they keep everything together, they're going to go into next year as a team that a lot of people would say top 3 in the Eastern Conference, maybe even top 2 in the Eastern Conference. So this isn't a dire situation for them, but there are clearly issues that they need to address if they're talking about being a championship team, because they're not on Indiana's level. They're not, I'm sorry. They're not on New York's level. They're just not. They're not on OKC's level. They've got to do something that is going to allow them to improve their championship chances. I'm happy that I don't have to make that decision, because I think it's a very difficult decision for Kobe Altman in this front office.
Chris actually does like the space he's in, because he doesn't have to make any of these decisions.
Yeah, I just have to talk about it.
With all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.